Welcome to this week's episode of Esports Wrap. I'm your host, Michael Amorgan. And this week, we're going to be talking about something that I actually talked about 2 days ago. See, I was invited to a conference of some sorts, a local conference that's about anime and gaming and stuff like that. And what happened was they had sent a request, do you want to, we have a space, do you want to talk? So I said, sure. And, during the conversation, it kind of went like, okay, well, I mainly deal with gaming. Like, what is it that you want me to, is there anything in particular you wanted someone to talk about? And they were like, anime. So I said, okay, let me think about it. Thought. How does anime and, whoa, why is this showing up like that? How does anime and gaming really work together? And hey, Paladin, welcome to the stream, man. And so that's where this particular topic came from. Now, we did try to record it at the event, and I have about a minute of it, which is like right around the time where Dwan is doing her introduction, and for some reason, which is very weird, it had an issue. And like when I checked it afterwards, it's like, ooh, yeah, check the SD card, took it out, put it back in, works fine. Was able to recover that minute-long thing, but I don't know why it died, so I'm not sure. But either way, here we are today. And we're going to be talking about that same topic, mainly because I know there were some people that were hoping to get a recording of the event from Sunday, but obviously that didn't work out. So we're going to be talking about that today. Yeah, we're going to move on, and thank you. I figured this would be probably one of the better welcoming messages, considering this is an anime that's quite literally says no game, no life. It's obviously about two siblings who play games together, and even though they don't look anything alike. Anyway, that is a whole nother thing on its own. And before we really get into anything, we have to give a little bit of a history. And this is where things kind of get a little funky that people don't really know about. Now, here's the thing. In the 1970s, gaming in America was actually a really, really big thing. And it was actually ran mainly back then, very similar to how it is now, except that there were more arcades, where you have the arcade cabinets and everything like that, and you put in your quarters and you play games like that. Or you would have a system like an Atari system, and you play that at home, play with people in your neighborhood. If you didn't have one yourself, that kind of thing. They had so much power back then that in 1979, the US gaming companies lobbied the US government to change the currency. And they actually succeeded. The reason why they did this is because the Eisenhower $1 coin was too big for the vending machines or arcade machines. And they wanted something that was easy to put inside the vending machines and arcade machines, because they noticed in Japan, the equivalent to the $1 coin, which is the 100 yen, was actually the most prevalent form of payment for gaming, arcades back then. You put in your 100 yen, you play your game, that kind of thing. And so they wanted something that was quick and easy and simple. Now, they eventually was able to get the US government to agree to it, and that's where the Susan B. Anthony $1 coin comes from. It's kind of weird when you really think about it, that gaming companies were actually able to change the form of currency for the United States. But yeah, there was some fight back from it, because now it was a little bit too easy to mix that between quarters and $1 and stuff like that, which is still kind of the issue even today's Susan B. Anthony coin. I know within the past few years I've gotten at least 3 from a vending machine when I should have actually just gotten quarters. But I'm not going to complain. That's 75 cents more than what I should have got. So, but there was some problems on the horizon. And in 1983, this is when the US game market crashed, or what they called in Japan the Atari shock. Now, the reason why they called it the Atari shock is because the US game market really and truly crashed because of Atari. Or not so much because of Atari themselves, but because of how they had their systems set up. See, back then, cartridges were pretty open and whatnot, but there weren't a lot of people that actually knew how to develop for them and actually like encode a game onto the cartridge. So ET destroyed the gaming industry hype. Well, see, here's the thing though. Like, when gaming was becoming a bigger thing, like it got to, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but there was such a hype that was building up. I'm going to get to this in a moment, from the like 1980s, 1981, 1982, that by 1983 they were doing some really stupid stuff. And we're going to get into that, but the main issues that really caused the crash was people moving from Atari, the amount of developers that came out afterwards, and of course PC price wars. Something to keep in mind, 1982 they had a revenue of about $3.2 billion. 1983 that went to about $100 million in about 1 to 2 years. It's not really the greatest drop right there. Now, remember how I said they were doing some stupid stuff? So, 1982, the merchants saw, that 1983, there was probably going to be like 100% uptick of demand. So, they started building out games and buying more stuff and creating more stuff to supply 175%, which is much more than they actually should have actually been building out, considering they only had an amount of 100. And that was a projected demand. The most that they should have gone was 25%. 35, if you must. Shouldn't have been any higher than that. Hey, Adam. Now, while these merchants and makers and everything like that were making these really dumb ideas and going forward with that with their business strategies, the actual staff side of stuff wasn't that great, because there were, well, back then developers didn't really get any credit. Meanwhile, people who worked on movies or songs and stuff like that, they used to get credit. Like, that's where the credit reel inside the movies come from and everything like that. And back then, that just wasn't a thing. No, the developers didn't get any credit at all for anything. You could spend months of your life away from family doing the crunch and everything like that, and you just never got recognized. And that started to piss people off. So much so that 4 developers from Atari left and created Activision, which is one of the most popular game developers around nowadays. Now, here's the thing though. They took their knowledge, because they actually knew how to build for Atari, and then took that, started programming and building out their own games, started making their own cartridges, and loading the games up onto those and selling them as a third-party game system, games to people who already have Atari systems. Now, Atari didn't really like that. They, back then, everyone was, oh, you have an Atari, you buy games from Atari. You have this console, you buy games from this console maker. That kind of thing. Kind of similar to how we do it today, but a little different. See, you could have bought, nowadays you can buy from Steam, Epic. You can buy hard copy you can buy from a lot of different places. You didn't have to go and just get it from one particular source. That was the main difference. Back then, you just got it hard copy. That's how you got the game. Be it floppy disk, be it CD, be it whatever it was. That's how you got your games. Now, or cartridge. I don't know why I didn't think cartridge. Anyway, so from that one developer, Activision, came 3 other developers. Came 100 developers. Sorry, 30 developers, then 100 developers, then 400 developers, and not all of them actually knew how to code or make a game for that most part. A lot of them didn't have the experience. And so things like reverse engineering and industrial espionage, which back then was very much in a hype because of movies and like spy movies and stuff like that. But that also had a very negative connotation inside the media because like people were going to jail and getting caught and stuff like that. And people didn't want anything to do with that. But this was still happening in the gaming industry. So, I mean, what could you do? So, aside from the industrial espionage, again, you had poor games coming out. Like, so poor that when people actually took the time to do research, 75% of sales went to just 10% of the games that were on the market. Now, this caused a problem with those hundreds of other developers because, well, their stuff wasn't really selling, meaning that they started ending up inside bargain bins at a much cheaper price, and even then, they weren't really selling. The companies who were selling this stuff inside their stores then tried to take it back to the makers to say, hey, can we get a refund? Can you give us some other games that we can maybe try to sell? But those makers didn't have anything else because they were going off of what they already had. And so a lot of them, now not having any funds to really deal with this, ended up folding or going bankrupt or just simply disappearing, like Games by Apollo and US Games. Add on the extra thing of two very high and well-known PC makers, Commodore and Texas Instruments. They decided that they were going to have a price war, mainly because of, how should I put this? The age-old thing of why get a console when you can have a PC? See, remember, back then, you had consoles much like today, but you also had gaming computers that only played games. They couldn't do anything more, and they were still like computers. And so the computer makers were like, well, why are you buying those gaming computers which only do this when you can buy you can buy an actual computer that can play games and also do things like word processing, spreadsheets, Minesweeper, and all these other things that you could actually be productive with your life. Now, hey, don't get on us too hard. PC is still master race. But here's the thing, though. That got to a point because Commodore and Texas Instruments, because they were trying to get the market to switch over from games, which had a really, really powerful ecosystem, they had to start going down in price. And going down in price and going down in price and going down in price until they got to the issue. And keep in mind now, consoles back then ranged from anywhere between $200 to $400, while gaming PCs were about $1,000 to $1,500. Now, these regular PCs got down so far in price that they were competing with gaming consoles and gaming computers. This meant gaming stuff really had a problem. Like, Atari had a problem. They couldn't really compete with PCs. And, this whole thing became, oh my gosh, what do we do? Now, all this caused the crash to happen, which then add on, the whole thing of the Great Depression. Then you have a market crash, and then you add industrial espionage onto that. Like, back then, the Great Depression's still on a lot of people's minds. So this whole thing with games became a dirty word. So much so that a lot of people who made games didn't call them games anymore. They called them simulations. Like, if you probably were there for it, you'd probably remember seeing on the shelves Dare Hunting Simulator or Racing Simulator or something like that. They wouldn't call them games. They were simulators. You know, it's simulated real life. Blah, 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 blah. But it got so bad that Atari ended up actually burying 700,000 of their games in a landfill in New Mexico. Now, there was a rumor, and it became an urban myth at the time, that they had actually buried millions of copies and that they were worth priceless amounts of money because, you know, you can just go there, get games, and then sell them. And, you know, eventually someone actually gave them permission to go and dig it up and stuff like that. And turns out, nope, it was not millions. It was just 700,000, which is still a significant amount of games, to be quite honest. But that just went to show, like, they didn't expect to sell these games at all. Like, this was just a loss for them. Period. Blank. They knew they weren't getting this money back. The nail in the coffin? Stores stopped selling game consoles, and they severely reduced the amount of games that they actually sold back then. Now, you'd think, since I'm talking about game consoles and, you know, gaming computers, maybe the arcade would still be doing good? Nope. Between 1980 to 1982, there was an uptick in arcades from 5,000 to 10,000 across the United States. Now, 1983, 1,500 of those shut down, and the rest of them were saying that they were seeing like negative 40% of revenue. Like, they just could not really sustain that, and it was not good at all. So obviously things changed between 1983 and today, because gaming is quite prolific around the world. You have tournaments, you have esports, you know, a lot of this is going on. Now, something had to have changed, and that something was Nintendo. Nintendo came out, and at the time, during this whole thing, they had a console called the Famicom, and they rebranded it. They were smart. They took a look at what was happening in the industry. They took a look at what happened with Atari, and they said, you know what, we're going to do things differently. We're not going to brand this as a gaming console or gaming computer. We're going to brand this as an entertainment system. And not only that, they then started things like control decks and going with phrases, buzzwords like control deck, gamer pack, or even just selling a toy with it called Rob, to actually get it to be sold back in stores. And it worked. It worked very well. It also helped that they made it very simple. You know, they made it so it's like a VHS type system or a VHS cassette tape, and you just pop it in, and then you play your game. Like, you're good, you're golden, super. Now, they did a little bit more than that, though. Goku had his moments, but we're gonna get into that. We're actually gonna get into those games. Now, Nintendo remembered what happened with Atari and Activision and how people broke off, created their own third-party developers, and they said, you know what? We're gonna do things a little differently. Developers, you can make games, but you have to let us see them first before you can sell them. And we will give it, if we deem it worthwhile, the Nintendo stamp of approval, which means that it's good quality. They did this for peripherals, accessories, games, you name it. And this worked well for them. Nintendo, that is. For the developers, they got limited to how many games they could make per year, and at the time I think it was either 3 or 5. I believe it was 5 though. And how that worked was, you made your game, you sent it to Nintendo then sends it on, and puts it inside of a cartridge to sell. Now, if that game doesn't sell, that's on you as a developer. Like, Nintendo is not going to give you back any funds. They're not going to do anything. That simply means that you made a game that was low quality and that people did not want to buy. So do better. Don't make a game like that anymore. And learn from your mistakes. That was essentially Nintendo's take on that. Yeah, excuse me. What? I'm pretty sure there were a lot of developers that thought that same thing. Now, they also took the stance of locking their cartridges, which means that, you couldn't reverse engineer them to then start making your own cartridges to put inside the NES. Oh, to the Goku thing. We're going to get to the Goku thing. Like I said, we're going to get to that. Now, they didn't so much do this because of the United States. They did the locking more so because of other places in Asia where reverse engineering, stuff like this, was really prevalent. And people used to pirate games a lot. And, it's just, we're not going to allow this to happen. We're going to lock it down, so on and so forth. Granted, now people still were able to get past it, but it made it that much harder to do it. Now, all these restrictions actually ended up pissing off EA, which is kind of funny. Because at the end of the day, like, even in a press statement that was on July 31st this year, EA pretty much was saying like they didn't see the relevancy of having some of their games on Nintendo systems. I think even up to today, there's only like maybe 3 or 4 games that they have on the Switch. Anyway, Nintendo did great things. People started to see gaming as a more, relevant thing again. And the PC prices started to go back up. That also helped because, well, now that you have prices going back up and people seeing that, the PC wars versus gaming console wars wasn't not really that much of a thing anymore, some of them decided to leave the space and stop selling PCs on a whole, which then gave an end to the price wars. Simple as. Which then allowed gaming to become the form that we know it today. Now, how is all that relevant to today's topic, which is how anime and video games are relevant? Well, for starters, if we take a look over in the corner here, you'll see some cover art. Those who know what the game is, you also know that it comes from, well, something called Castlevania. Castlevania? It's an anime. But again, we have to point out Nintendo and Sega. Now, Sega is not one that's I've mentioned so far because Sega is not one that actually changed things. But these two companies, being Japanese based, they really started to change the way how the style of gaming was represented in the United States. And not even there, worldwide. Because don't forget, they also were selling inside of Europe. They were selling inside of Asia, of course. They were selling in Latin America, pretty much anywhere that they could. And like I said, this brought a new style to gaming. The Japanese art style, that is. Now, we noticed the first wave of Eastern culture hitting the United States, which then opened up things to anime. But if we take a look, things like Akira came out not so long afterwards, and that became a cult classic. Akira is an anime, for those who don't know. In Japan, though, we had games which led to manga and anime and TV shows like the Mario Bros. You also had games that came over to the United States but weren't known by the names that they were actually supposed to be known as. For example, Fist of the North Star came over as a very anonymous name of Black Belt. So unless you actually knew the characters and saw the characters, you probably had no idea that that game actually came from an anime. You also had games like Final Fight and Street Fighter 2, which brought over that Japanese fighting style for fighting games, which then saw, as we know now today, a quite big surge in popularity. Even though fighting games are one of the lower watched versions of esports, but that should still go to show where this like all stands. The fact that fighting games, which are some of the more popular ones, well, some of the more well-known ones, are using Japanese characters for the most part. For a lot of them, that's saying something. Now, video games coming to anime. If we take a look at the corner over here, we actually have, right, how does this work? Here, the old anime for Legend of Zelda, where Link is not blonde. He's a brunette. Yeah. Now, eventually they changed it and so on and so forth, but that was how they represented him inside the anime. You also have the Adventures of Super Mario Bros. And, like mentioned inside the chat, we also had Dragon Quest coming out. Though Dragon Quest came out as Dragon Warrior over in this side of the world. Now, anime was already having its foot over inside the United States and in other places. So, things like Astro Boy, Speed Racer. I think Speed Racer was probably one of my first anime, to be quite honest. And Kimba the White Lion, which we saw some serious rips from Disney when it comes to The Lion King. Came out, in the 1960s. And, that was cool, but for America, they saw that more as cartoons versus anime. For whatever reason. Like, sure, why not? If it makes you feel more accepted, if you can become more popular, sure, get yourself called cartoon. It's still animation, which anime is short for, so it's all good. Pac-Man became the first TV show based off of a game. Now, this was in 1982, and granted, it was an American thing. It still set the way for other games, like Captain N, which, the show was called Captain N the Game Master, and they took a lot of characters and items and stuff like that from Nintendo games and brought them into the show. They actually also had some time block being shared between, I think it was CBS and one TV company inside Canada. They were pretty much doing it both in the United States and Canada, where they would have Captain N, then Super Mario Bros, and another one, I believe. Yeah, so they did that for an hour-long block. Mario Bros. Live action in 1989 came out, animated in 1990 and 1991, which, I have the picture of right there. Like I mentioned, Dragon Quest came out in 1990 as Dragon Warrior, both the game and the anime. So that was a little bit interesting. And in 1993, Sega's Sonic decides to show up and become a cartoon. I would not really call that one so much an anime. That one was more cartoonish, in my opinion. Now, that being said, I'm pretty sure most of us know who most of these guys are. Yeah, exactly. It was super cartoonish. But, if we take a look at this image that I have over here onto the right, we can tell all of these are anime characters. But if we take a look, we can see Chopper from One Piece, Ash and Pikachu from Pokemon. We have Yu Yu Hakusho. We have Yu-Gi-Oh! We have Ichigo from Bleach. We have Naruto from Naruto. We have the Edward and Alphonse from Full Metal Alchemist, so on and so forth. And the thing about it is, most of these characters, quite a lot of them have games based off of the anime shows. So Dragon Ball, of course, has fighting games that most of us know about nowadays, but that wasn't always the case. We of course know Pokemon. One Piece has their own game, but they're also a part of Jump Stars. So is Dragon Ball. So is Ichigo. So is Naruto. I don't know if you guys know, but there was a Inuyasha game that came out. There was a Trigun game that came out. Of course, there's Sonic. There's Attack on Titan's game that came out. We have Hunter x Hunter, which came out. Pretty much, if you have an anime that has a rivalry going on nowadays, there's going to be a game for it somewhere, somehow. Now, up in the top right-hand corner of my screen, well, of the presentation, I should say, that was the original Dragon Ball game. That's Goku flying on his Nimbus cloud. It's very old school. It was made in 1986, and that's kind of how it worked. It was really, really basic. Now, in 1987, the first Mega Man game came out. Now, the weird thing about Mega Man was that Mega Man was actually based off of Astro Boy, which was, an anime. But Astro Boy was actually based off of the old story about Pinocchio. So that's not Asian based. That's more European American based. And so Worlds is this very small place. 1988, Astro Boy comes out, which is very ironic because it comes out a year after the thing that it copied it, essentially. But Astro Boy then was known as Mighty Atom. And it had a very weird thing where, it had a one-hit death rule, which means you get hit, you're dead. In 1993, the first Yu Yu Hakusho game came out for Game Boy, PC, Super NES, and a few other systems, including, I think, arcade. And like I mentioned, from there, other more popular anime with rivalry started to see things. I kind of already went over this. Death Note, by the way, also had a game that came out in 2007, and so did Seven Deadly Sins in 2018. Yeah, I'm not so sure about the whole Sonic being inspired by Mickey Mouse thing. Especially when you see where Mickey Mouse first came from and his original concept art. So it's, I don't know. I don't put a whole lot of stock into that particular rumor. Now, with all things like this happening, and we're gonna be wrapping up with this one right here. You even have games coming from anime like One Punch Man, where you didn't think, something like this would actually be possible, especially with how the premise for One Punch Man's anime is the main character quite literally defeats any and everyone with one punch. But somehow they managed to make it work. Now I'm going to disable the sound so we don't get a copyright thing. But this is essentially the One Punch Man game. Saitama is there hitting people, taking out their full health in one shot. But as we see here, you actually have to start playing the match with a regular character, and you have to wait for Saitama to run to you. And it actually has a timer and everything like that. And it says like how long it's going to be and so on and so forth. Me personally, I would find it hilarious if he had to stop and get groceries or do something like and just have you just waiting there. Now, as he gets closer, of course, you see him start to dash up. He changes over. He says, "You did nice," so on and so forth. He doesn't pretty much take any damage, and then one hit KOs the guy. And people are saying this is fine. And this is actually something that's completely different from what's on the market in terms of how the game actually plays. Sure, you have combos or supers and stuff like that, but they're not a one-hit KO kind of thing. Not only that, you have, and I think the new Jump Stars actually had some people from Boku no Hero. So you're going to see games coming out trying to change up the dynamics of stuff, basing themselves off of anime, and you're going to be getting games, anime basing themselves off of games. So, quite in all truth, the link is there. Don't let anyone ever tell you that, there's not a link between video games, and anime. Don't ever let them tell you that, just because someone likes anime, they don't like games, because chances are if you put them in front of a game, they'll sit down and play it. If you put a gamer in front of anime, they'll probably give it a shot at the very least and see if they like it or not. So that is actually it for this week's episode of Esports Wrap. Thank you everyone that decided to jump in and listen, even though this is technically the second time for some of you. Would have heard me say it live this past Sunday. But don't forget, folks, Esports Wrap is on every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our sister show, MOAR Tech, is on Thursdays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And feel free to jump into either the More Cookies Discord or the Bahamas Gamers and Otaku Discord. If you're either from the Bahamas or living in the Bahamas, you could jump inside there and be a part of the community. Have fun. And yeah, until next time, guys, this is Michael Amargan. Keep it savvy.